שלום וחג עצמאות שמח. יהדות קנדה היא כיום הקהילה היהודית הרביעית בגודלה בעולם, אחרי ישראל, ארצות הברית וצרפת. רוב היהודים מתגוררים בערים טורונטו ומונטריאול. יהודים החלו להגיע לקנדה החל מסוף המאה ה-19, בעיקר ממזרח אירופה, וזכו לשוויון זכויות מלא. נכון ל-2022 בקנדה חיים כ-400,000 יהודים, המהווים כ1% מהאוכלוסייה במדינה. הארגון האחראי על יהודי קנדה מול הרשויות הפדרליות הוא ארגון ה-UJA, ה-United Jewish Appeal. והיום, בשידור מיוחד ליום העצמאות, נמצא איתנו נשיא ה-UJA, מר אדם מינסקי. שלום מיסטר מינסקי, חג שמח.
שלום, רונן, חג שמח, you too.
First of all, thank you very much for joining our show and happy Independence Day. And before we'll even start talking about the direction our community is heading under your leadership, please allow me to ask you a personal question.
Of course, of course.
Adam, what do you feel and what do you think about today when Israel celebrates its 74th independence, but we as Jews are here in Canada?
You know, the thing I think about the most actually has to do with recent experience I just had. I've been to Poland and the border with the Ukraine twice in the last month. And because we're involved together with the Israeli organizations we support in very important humanitarian work there.
This is an extremely emotional place to be, you know, with more than 2 million Ukrainian refugees coming to Poland, or one of the main border crossings. You see the stream of refugees that are just passing before us, and the first thing that they see when they cross into Poland is this tent with the Israeli flag, as represented by the work that we support, the work of the Jewish Agency, and together with the JDC, with volunteers handing water and treats to people to try and take their mind off what they've just experienced on the other side of the border. It's really an extremely powerful thing to see.
And what I think about the most in relation to Israel on Yom HaAtzmaut is how dramatically Israel has changed the condition of the Jewish people, both in Israel, but certainly around the world. You know, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They were refugees, and in that same part of the world that I've been visiting. And when you stand on the border, on the Polish side of the border with the Ukraine, and the most prominent thing you see when you come across is the Israeli flag, and that the kind of services that are available to Jewish refugees at this time, they are really something that we would all be so proud of. It is a privilege to be a Jewish person in that part of the world right now. That it's just so clear that Israel has changed the Jewish world in such a powerful way and in such a way for good.
Well, very strong words to start with, and even I would say emotional. And Adam, in the next 24-25 minutes, I will ask you to share with us your vision to our Jewish community and to our viewers here on this special broadcast for Independence Day. My recommendation, stick with us for the next half an hour. Mr. Adam Minsky and I will talk about our Jewish community here in Canada. Here we go. Adam, the first question I'd like to ask you is related to our recent experiences. In the past year or two, Toronto has experienced a wave of raising anti-Semitism, and we all remember the riots in Nathan Phillips Square. My question is, what is the duty of the UJA in reference to these events?
So UJA's mission is to help the Toronto Jewish community, the national Canadian Jewish community, and Jewish communities worldwide be strong and vibrant Jewish communities. So when you have a security threat, which really touches on one of the most fundamental issues for Jews living anywhere, it's obvious to me that if we care about the health and well-being of the community, we need to do something to address it. That's why in the aftermath of some of the events in May, we've made an enormous investment as a community in building a security infrastructure, not in any way to replace the security services of the Canadian government and our local police forces, but to work in partnership with them and to make sure that Jewish organizations have the kind of preparedness, the kind of strong connections to local law enforcement that they need in order to upgrade the security of the community as a whole. We've done that in terms of physical security, but we're also doing that in terms of online security as well, because as we saw in May in particular, so much of what was happening online as much as it was happening on a physical level.
The Jewish community in Canada is, and especially in Toronto, is an aging community. But recently there has been more and more new members of this community coming in, like myself, for example, that came from Israel to live here in Canada. Can you share with us a little bit your vision of how these two groups will become one larger community, and what is the influence of one group on another, and how do you see it? I mean, because for many years it was the Jewish Canadians and the Israeli Canadians, but I know that one of your missions is to bring this one together. Can you talk a little bit about that vision?
Sure. We have been investing as an organization in this area for almost 20 years now. Recognizing that the Israeli-Canadian community, and certainly the community in Toronto, I would say, based on the Canadian census, we believe that as much as a quarter of our 200,000 strong Jewish community are people who are Israeli passport holders, let's say. So whether they are people who were born in Israel, whether they are people who came from the former Soviet Union to Israel and then came to Toronto, or whether they are, Canadians who have made Aliyah and come back. About a quarter of our community are Israeli citizens, and for our community, this represents enormous opportunity in many ways. One is there is a vibrancy and a way of seeing the world that Israelis bring to our community that deeply enriches our community. The influx of Israelis, particularly in the last 30 years to this community, has gone through an evolution. When the early waves of Israelis came 30, 40 years ago to Toronto, there was enormous stigma associated with leaving Israel. And many of those Israeli immigrants, because of the ideological baggage that they were carrying, never fully integrated into the Toronto community. I'm always approaching the community from the perspective that they would be going back to Israel at some point. Now, the reality is that most of those people that I grew up with are still here and are important contributors to the local Jewish community. But that ideological baggage doesn't exist in any way near with the intensity that it did, 30 and 40 years ago. And we open our arms as a community and say to the Israeli community that has come here that we want them involved in all aspects of the Jewish community. We need to evolve as a community based on the Israeli experience, and hopefully we will influence them to evolve also. One of the things that we hear repeatedly from Israeli Canadians who are here is coming almost too late to the awareness of the type of educational opportunities they need to be part of, particularly with their kids, in order to instill that sense of Jewishness, which comes so naturally and easily when you live in Israel, but is something that you have to work at when you're part of a diaspora community, even a terrific community like ours that has a lot of opportunity for Jews, it's still something that we have to work at every day. And so, you know, there are great organizations throughout the city, but particularly the Schwartz-Reisman Center, the Matnas in York region, has incredible programming for Israeli Canadians.
What is your vision in the coming years for the Jewish community in Canada? How do you see it prosperous, and how do you see it evolving from where it is today?
I think there are many issues where we need to evolve as a community. You know, the most fundamental being that in this day and age, being Jewish is a choice. Our role as an organization is to fund all kinds of exciting programs and opportunities. We're very much watching and experimenting and doing important things to deepen our community's connection to Israel, because, as you said, with the events in May, Israel increasingly, and particularly for students on college and university campuses, they are being challenged to really decide whether they want Israel as a core part of their Jewish identity, because they're hearing so much hateful stuff on college and university campuses and on social media. We want to make sure that A, they know the truth, and B, that they feel equipped to push back and to be proactive and to be proud of not just their Jewish identity, but their strong connection to Israel. As you saw in May, you can have a politician who may be on side with the Jewish community, but when the street is yelling Free Palestine, there weren't that many politicians who were prepared to stand up and say, I disagree with that.
Yeah.
We need to be more proactive as a community in reaching the masses, both online and through the ability to mobilize as a community so that we can be much more activist. I'm recognizing the fact that we are, as a percentage, a smaller and smaller percentage of Canadian society. And so we need to be smarter and smarter about how we use our voice.
Adam, what is your message today, not only to Israel, but also to Jewish people living here in Canada as Israel celebrates its 74th anniversary?
My message is simple. You know, to Israel, we have your back. We are partners in this together. That Israel is a source of strength for this community. I hope that we are a source of strength for Israelis and for Israel. You can count on the Toronto Jewish community to do its utmost to strengthen the bonds that we have today and going forward.
Okay, Adam Minsky, I want to thank you very much for this talk. You're always welcome here on Perspectives TV, our new Israeli Jewish channel here in Canada. And I wish you and your family Chag Sameach and Happy Independence Day. Toda rabba.
Toda rabba, Ronen. The work you're doing is absolutely terrific. Thank you for doing this. It's great to be part of your show. Chag Sameach.